Good evening, welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned. Welcome to MOTS Ado About Nothing, this Lost Signals literary MOTS program. A man who proves that a broken TikTok man is right twice a day, Scott Thurlow.
Hello, you'll all repent soon enough.
The last great astronomer of Lagash, Beth Morgan.
Hello.
And a man who's only claustrophobic in the light, Christopher Morgan.
Good evening.
Today we're going to discuss Nightfall by Isaac Asimov. So, Scott, was the initial hook interesting? Were you enraptured by the beginning?
Now, see, you probably are expecting me to say one without much, but I'm going to say, this is a quick disclosure, I am a big fan of sci-fi in general, and Isaac Asimov, of course, is one of the greats of it, forefathers of the whole genre. But I have to say, with this story, it was a little slow. Like, the convo was took a little bit to get to, so I might have to give it a 0 on this one. I wasn't quite drawn in by it, even knowing it was him. So, I don't know. At this time, he didn't have a strong start, I suppose.
Yeah. Beth?
This is hard to answer because I knew what the story was going to be before I read it. So I knew the premise. So I was kind of hooked by the premise. So the intro, I was willing to get through, even though sometimes stylistically it's a bit hard to get into some of Asimov's stuff.
Yeah.
I would still give it a 1. Just because my experience of it, I was already involved.
I am not a huge fan of sci-fi. And actually, I've heard of Isaac Asimov and I've seen works based off of him before. But this is actually the first thing I've ever read by him. And I was very intrigued by his style. Maybe if I had read other works of his, I'd have more towards Scott's opinion on it. But he kind of builds this interesting world with kind of this signature alien style to it, and I wanted to see where he was going with it. So I was actually really immediately invested in seeing where everything was going. So I'm going to give it a 1. Chris?
Yeah, I'm right with Scott and Beth. I do love science fiction, and early Asimov I find very, very dry. But I'm also kind of a sucker for things where they just drop you in the middle of the action. I feel like that's what he did here. So right away it was kind of like, here's the character, and I'm like, okay, he's got a really interesting name, Anton 77. What does that mean? Is that his age? Is that his dick? So yeah, I'm going to definitely give it a strong 1. And as you said before, because this is definitely something I'm going to want to come back to, is that how the story builds. So I think that was a really appropriate place to start because the story is a lot of dialogue, and I don't want to jump ahead, but
No, sure. Actually, you just mentioned something. That's true. That was intriguing about it. Their names are superseded by numbers. That was a good world-building element, but I still don't think it's enough to change my answer that, yes, that was probably the most interesting, noticeable thing about the opening, framework exchange dialogue. So I will say, Chris, just to that point, I did like that about the story, but it's still not enough to change my answer, but
soft 0.
But good detail to bring up. Yes.
Okay, Beth. Was the work totally consistent throughout?
This one, I'm going to give it a 1. I felt like the story from the beginning to it sped up a bit, the pacing.
I agree with that.
But because of the actual plot, that just kind of worked. And so I thought tonally, it was consistent throughout the story. I don't really have much comments about it beyond that.
Okay.
It was. Let's go on. What do you think?
I'm kind of torn on this because this might apply more to the immersion later on. But there's a fantastic scene right towards the beginning where the psychiatrist is having a discussion with the newsman. I don't remember their names off that. Shireen and
Theramon.
Theramon's the newsman.
And it's a fantastic piece of dialogue. And I was really enraptured with the entire thing. And then it cuts to a break-in from the cultist. And I felt this was very weak for numerous reasons. I felt that the cultist was unnecessary, that he could have added that his points to other characters within the story felt out of place. So I don't know if it was truly tonal.
So I was going to say, was that switch the tone, is what you're saying?
It's a question of whether it is more of an immersive question, because I did break my immersion. And we have to, but I'll get to that.
Get to that later, sure.
But
go on.
Aside from that scene, everything else fit in well. So I'm going to give it a soft 1 because of just that one scene. It was enough to break my focus off of it, but I think the work as a whole,
but it still kept its
strong.
Tone,
Yes.
Okay.
So, Chris,
I'm definitely going to give it a 1 because in terms of tonally consistent, as I said, I sometimes find early Asimov a little dry. But
I agree with that. I'll speak about it. Go ahead.
But and maybe I'll get to this later, but the story kind of reminded me like one of the better hour-long episodes of Twilight Zone, where they padded the hell out of it, and it gets a little dry, but the story's really good. Yeah. But
I like that.
Tonally, the atmosphere is consistent throughout. This really, more than anything of the other stories, really reminds me of a Twilight Zone episode, and I think it kept, in terms of whatever the subject was, from scene to scene or whatever, or how the plot built, I felt tonally, it just felt like a very complete Twilight Zone episode.
All right, Scott.
Fair enough. I'm going to give it a 1. It was totally consistent. I see what you mean about that scene, but I don't quite go to the lengths that you do. I don't think it was that jarring or unnecessary, I guess is what you really said about it. I don't quite agree with that. I think it was perfectly... It served what it needed to do perfectly fine. And you're saying they could have maybe served it without that? Maybe. I don't know. It wasn't enough to... I agree with you guys. It's not enough to make it totally inconsistent. And I wanted to bring this point up. I mentioned this story to you guys, possibly some of you, at least at some point. To me, it was like a flip side of an Arthur C. Clarke story called The 9 Billion Names of God, if anyone has ever heard of that or read that. It was almost like they're the same story almost, but from two different, like, two sides of the same coin. Like, and as Chris just said, I very much like that. It did read like a Twilight Zone script almost. And given that, it kept its tone, it kept its message, it was on point. So, yeah, I'll give it a 1.
Well, I'm going to start off with, was the work effective within its genre, and did it address its themes? I thought the themes were fantastic. And it was kind of predictable of where they were going about halfway through, but I respect for what they were attempting to do, and I particularly liked how they made reference to a theoretical Earth and how we should have discovered all of this a very, very long time ago.
Yeah, it was a funny little science joke, but it was a good one, yeah.
The only, but within this genre, this always struck me. I'm a very big linguistics fan. I like studying like the evolution of language, and it always seems funny to me how science fiction will throw out like weird terms to refer to things, and yet use slang, a modern present slang, in their work. So it's kind of just jarring to me, and this is I'm still going to give it a 1, but it's just a pet peeve of mine. But there's two actual things I found interesting about this. A couple of the names kind of rang bells in my head, and I looked them up. Lagash, which is the planet it takes place in, is a Sumerian city-state from, I believe, was destroyed by Uruk or something like that.
By 6 suns going away. Go.
And then Aton, who's the head astronomer there, is the Egyptian sun god. So I thought those were interesting little...
good and relevant references. So
yeah, I don't know if they were meant to have any deeper meaning to them just beyond the reference, but I thought that was pretty neat. So again, I'm going to give it a 1, and we'll move on to Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to say it was extremely effective within its genre. I'm sorry, I was distracted by all the backstory of the names. But yeah, it is very much a science fiction story.
Dropping knowledge on him now, I can't remember his answer. Go on. Yeah,
I was right away and consistently throughout. It's a Twilight Zone story. It's a science fiction story. I mean, just the names alone and the numbers. The numbers I thought was interesting because it really, unless I missed something, wasn't really explained. They just were.
No, it's just a detail. Yeah.
As Ian said, it was just alien enough. You realized that this was like an alternate or it's what is it, like a sister world to Earth, which is funny because
a parallel, if you will.
At the end, he breaks the fourth wall and says, and compares it to Earth. He says, I'll find the quote later, but I thought it was very effective, and I thought it kept you guessing, and I thought the story really built, and yeah, I'm definitely giving it a 1.
To that point, the fact that they have to invent candles is a nice little like a tribute to how different this world is. It's you can see Earth in it, but it's alien enough, and it does this kind of winks and nods enough that it works in the setting. Okay, Scott.
So you just brought something else earlier. You said you felt it was predictable. Now here's the thing. This often comes up as well. That could be an artifact of the times. For the time, this is one of the Asimov, of course, as I said, like sort of codified the genre itself. So this was like, if you're reading the story at the time, you may not have thought it was as predictable as it is now because it's influenced so many things that have come after it.
That's a very good point.
So, but the problem is we are reading it now. So should we analyze it that way? You know what I mean? Like filter through that. Regardless, I'm going to give it a 1. Yes, I think it was effective within the sci-fi genre. I'm calling it sci-fi or speculative fiction. Perhaps we'll say that soon enough. But either way, yeah, it was, and its themes, as you said, were quite well done, and they're like obvious, but in a good way. Like it was clear what he wanted to say and about what, and so therefore it's a solid 1 for me.
Beth?
I'm also going to give it a strong 1. I think it was very effective within the sci-fi genre. I love the idea of the story. I love a civilization that has never seen stars, and it's just like this weird myth that no one really quite believes in, and even darkness, because there isn't darkness. And they don't create false darkness because it's just something they're not comfortable with. So, and the idea of them inventing those lights, those candles, that
I thought they were like torches essentially.
Yeah, and they burn some kind of animal fat, which creates a lot of smoke. So you know that the people who are locked in those bunkers are going to like suffocate.
Yeah,
because they don't understand that they can't just have a bunch of smoke. So no one's going to survive this. So I found it to be just exciting on a level of just like, wow, I've never thought of anything like this before. And I think it is hard to see a story that was written in the 1940s as like with fresh eyes without knowing all the stuff that's come since that was partially based on some of the stuff Asimov has done himself.
It's like the Citizen Kane effect, kind of.
Right, so you can try to see it like with new eyes and see it as something new and not predictable, but it's difficult because we live in the world we live in and have experienced the experiences that we have. So I think it
might diminish some of its original effect, but I think, as Rob said, we can still get that out of it, and you still think it did it well. Go on.
So then, on this point, we've all agreed that themes were great. I want the opinions about what the overall message was of this story. So I guess I'll start with Chris on this.
Yeah, wow, I'm so glad. This is gonna be a strong one for me. I really, 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 really loved. I want to say the message, but that's not quite as cut and dry, and I'm going to explain that.
Go on.
Because you had the cultists and you had the scientists, and right off the bat, I'm like going to think, oh, this is a religion bashing story. Okay, I'm on board.
I kind of thought the same thing.
But what was interesting was that the scientists, as analytic as they were and as advanced as they were, had that very much Dark Ages mentality. Like the world is flat, the universe is 4 light years.
The civilization itself is like 2,000 years old. It's not.
Yeah,
they say that outright because of the nature of the whole plot.
Yeah,
really,
but in some ways they're advanced.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
In some ways they're not. They've got telescopes, but they've never been able to see past the sun. Mm-hmm. So they were the scientists for saying that they were against the cultists. They were very superstitious, and they had a certain level of ignorance as well. Whereas the cultists start off as being kind of delusional and superstitious. Once they started talking about the stars and that the stars were real, I'm like, okay, so here we have a religion, but there's some reason in the religion, and here we have science, and there's some superstition in the science.
Yes.
And that was extremely fascinating to me. The story subverted my expectation literally from paragraph to paragraph. So I'm giving this a very strong one.
Yeah, so you're asking us, you basically want to answer what the message you thought it was real quickly.
We're literary.
Sure.
So it should deserve some
I'll
analysis.
speak to that, and Chris has touched on something. So I thought, I agree with you. It was a very nice touch. There was I don't remember the exact line, but and Eitan says something like, yes, we're working with the religious cultists. We know they're sort of like whack jobs, but they have some facts that we need, and we're working with them. In fact, they almost made like a little pact to the science and religion are working together to prove this, one with facts and one to just validate their own religion. I thought it was an interesting little theme to explore. And also, like, yeah, as you said, they also mentioned, the theory of gravity. Anyone could figure this out. Like that was a really nice touch, given what the world they live in, and based on like how it's set up. So yeah, that was very clever. So I like that about it. Good.
But I particularly like to that point when he's discussing how a planet that revolves around one sun should have figured out gravity far quicker than they did.
No, it's like the famous like 3-body problem. Like I thought it was like Asimov again was a scientist himself as well as a writer, so he knew about all these like the actual like things and issues in physics and known little like almost it could be like a fucking Futurama physics jokes essentially like.
Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would. I thought it was kind of a thing about the limits of human imagination. That they had never experienced something, so they couldn't.
They literally
conceive
could not
of it.
see
They literally just could not imagine what it would be like. So they're limited to this small universe. They say, I think, what if the universe was 8 light years across? That would be crazy. That would make us seem so insignificant. And you're like, well, that's just crazy. So it's just like they're so stuck in this small place that they can't see out of because they're isolated. So it's just they just can't break out of that. Even though they have these like kind of scripture things that have become scriptures, that apparently the civilizations before them have tried to record this just like they're doing now, but it only made through to the religion as opposed to the science. So they don't understand that these might have been scientific papers, scientific things that they were trying to get this message through to the next cycle, and it didn't get through.
Or the fact that they asked specifically how the scripture
would have survived.
Moved from, and this is scientists at the end of every civilization creates the scripture or what becomes scripture for the next generation. But on that point,
the other thing that I thought was because they had never imagined a life that could exist in darkness, so they thought light was the essential thing for life.
Yeah, true.
Whereas like we look at planets and we search for water because we think that's the essential building block
because of their situation.
And we could be completely wrong. Sure. Like there could be planets with things that are not based on water or carbon or anything.
Oh, methane
and it's just
Titan.
So forth.
We're limited by our own experience just as they're limited by theirs, but theirs was just smaller than ours. I'm
very kind of character driven in my point of view on literature. So you have the newsman who plays the role of the audience surrogate.
Yes.
You need him so people can explain things to him or what's going on.
You need someone to dump exposition on, sort of.
Then you have 3 other factions, as it were. You have the religious, you have the astronomers, which are the scientists, and you have the psychiatrist. And the fact that the psychiatrist is such a focal point was made me very curious why. But perhaps building off of Beth's analysis, the fact that when dealt with a harsh truth, a truth that destroys everything you believe in, you have the religious who fall back upon religion and decide to attack the astronomers because
they send them to a fucking mob, essentially. Yes. Yeah.
You have the astronomers who are losing their minds as well, but are able to deal with it better.
Are trying to record it, in fact.
But in a sense,
as they go insane.
The psychiatrist is that kind of in between a kind of spiritual and a completely
I like
scientific.
that. I agree with that.
And he's supposed to be, theoretically, should be the one who's able to control himself the most because he deals with the mind and he's the first one to start to lose it when darkness approaches.
But even all the scientists have accepted that they're going to go mad.
Yeah.
They're all, none of them doubt that.
But you have then the kind of 3 pillars: the religious, those of the scientists of the mind, and scientists of nature, I guess.
Sure.
And none of them can handle like harsh, great truths. So I think it's interesting. Is it really such a negative view of humanity and being able to deal with something beyond our ken?
Sure. Well, I want to touch real quickly, and then I'll let Chris go. I think another theme that is outright mentioned, referenced as such in the story, was the cyclical nature of things, or like a possible that could be seen as the nature of the whole universe.
All this has happened before.
Yeah, exactly, and in a certain sense. So like they sort of dropped that in. They figured it out. Their entire civilization is based on a cyclical event that destroys civilization the same way every time. So now they're just trying to do the best they can to record it, to pass it on. Whatever remains is they know it's going. Some of it is going to at least inform the next generation, and they have 2,500 years or whatever it is to figure it out before it happens again. But also, like as you just said as well, sort of the madness is I think, faced with an uncomfortable truth, what do you do to deal with it or don't deal with it, as the case may be. So I thought that was also a major-ish theme and well done and explored.
Well, first I'm going to say I'm always surprised, like, how much they knew really about physics back in the 40s. Like, obviously Hollywood didn't, but a lot of the science fiction
Asimov was a scientist.
Yeah, well, as you said, because they were scientists, or they at least read science journals. One thing I found really interesting is that I kind of considered at the end the cultist one, and forgive me if this is encroaching on another one, but another question, but when the scientists are talking about manual equipment, and when it starts, and it turns out the equipment are cameras.
Yeah.
So without any kind of recorded document, they're going to have pictures. So the next generation, the religion's going to see, we got pictures of God.
Yeah, interesting.
Interesting. Well,
unless it gets burnt.
Yeah,
unless
they burn it for light, of course.
on that point, Chris, did the work achieve its goals by the end? I think we've pretty much answered this, but nonetheless, let's
give your
go around
official
the
score.
scores.
It most certainly did. Because at first, like I said, I thought it was going to be, literally I thought it was going to be a religion bashing story, and it actually wasn't. It was pointing out the positives and negatives to both. It definitely was science leaning, but I thought it was interesting that the scientists basically thought the world was flat and that the universe was 4 light years. I found that all very interesting. I'd definitely give it a 1.
I also, probably the easiest question to answer, to give a 1 to for the story. Yes, I did achieve its goals and pulled it off quite well.
Beth?
I'll give it a 1.
It wasn't an emotional story to me.
I agree.
But it was an intellectual one. And I said, by the end of it. I kind of figured out where it was going about halfway through. But a number of the points they made along the way were very clever. And again, it might have had much more of an impact if I read it in the 40s versus today. But I think that it still holds true that we are blinded by our bias. So I have to give it very strong.
I adore Asimov, but he doesn't really do emotional stories.
Yeah.
It's just not really
That's a
his
fair
thing.
point. Yeah, good.
All right, Scott, we're going to move into characters now. Was the antagonist effective, appropriate, or memorable?
Now, this is a question we often struggle with to answer sometimes, and I think it applies here as well. Who exactly is the antagonist? Is it humanity's ignorance? Maybe, could you say that? I don't know. It's like, yes, true, but not through their own fault. They have the knowledge they have based on the situation they're in, so they're doing the best they can with it. So, I guess on the surface, of course, you're going to say the occultist is religion the antagonist, and yes, as Chris said, it's set up to be that way, but it turns out not quite to be the case. So they can't, maybe the guy who breaks in, the one lone cultist, he's the antagonist, he causes a little trouble for them, but he's still in the end, he's negated, really. So, I don't know, if I assume to myself that humanity's default ignorance about its situation, plight, wherever it may be, is in fact what they're struggling against, then I'll give that a 1. That's who I'm calling the villain if I had to name the villain / antagonist of this story.
Beth, do you agree with Scott?
I hadn't thought about it that way, and I prefer that to the way I was thinking of it, because I was going to give it a 0 because I couldn't figure out exactly who the antagonist... Because in the beginning, Aton apparently thinks of Theremin as his antagonist. Yeah, sure. But it turns out that Themin is more like a main character.
And Theremin thought of the psychiatrist as his antagonist.
Right, but they kind of bonded and helped each other. So, because I couldn't find someone to sort of say, this is the antagonist, I'm going to give it a 0, even though I like the idea of humanity's ignorance being an antagonist, but just because that...
There's no character that is antagonist.
Yeah,
but
so I'm going to give it
idea is
a
fair
0.
enough.
I'm sorry, Isaac Asimov.
I'm more along the line of Scott here, but I'm going to say it's the ultimate antagonist of all.
What else is there? Agreed.
No, but it's not ignorance. It's the unknown.
Yeah, sure.
And it's a slightly different... It's a subtle difference.
Like I said, it's not their ignorance per se. It's just that they know what they know, based on what they have to measure it with.
But all fear in the world is based off of
unknown.
The unknown.
True.
And this is ultimately everyone rushing to figure out what they can't comprehend. And ultimately, beyond all the petty arguments that they have, whether you're dealing with character to character or group to group, they're all trying to figure out, in a sense you could say this as religion on Earth is trying to figure out the same thing that scientists are trying to do. And in the end, can any of us comprehend it? Probably
Will
not.
it matter in the end? Sure.
As we're all driven mad in our search for the truth.
Yeah.
So, as that's the truth, and that will drive you mad, I will have to give it a maddening 1. Chris?
This is funny. I was thinking about the antagonist shifting, and that there really wasn't one I was going to give it a 0. But you and Scott sold me on a premise.
Ooh, ooh.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
That the antagonist is the ignorance, because as I said before, he breaks the fourth wall at one point, and it's when Theramon, who is, as Ian pointed out, the audience, basically looks up, after he sees that the
Yeah.
the cultist Latimir has gone insane. He looks up and he sees the stars, and he remembers the quote from the scripture, "Through it shone the stars." And the next sentence, Asimov breaks the fourth wall and says, "Not Earth's feeble 3,600
Yeah, we
stars."
need to come back to that. Because
Yeah,
that's
we will.
the
but
problem.
all of a sudden, that said to me that if Theramon is the audience's POV, and right after that, Asimov breaks the fourth wall, I have to go with that. The antagonist is the bigger picture, and I got to give it a 1.
I wish I had thought of that.
Lock it up.
But I'm not going to change my answer because I didn't think of it, and my own limitation
We're here
is
to
forcing me
discuss
to leave
and
it at
analyze
0.
in the Rod and Artscope.
So the unknown was your antagonist.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it beat me.
Okay. Now, well, you can make it up here. Main character, the protagonist. Who and was it effective?
I think of Theramon as the main character because he's sort of who you're supposed to see the
You see the
situation
story through his eyes.
Yeah.
And I found him to be effective, and him and the psychologist also. I enjoyed them. When it started with Aton, I was a little. The first time I read the story, I was a little like, I don't know if I can follow this guy, but I did like Theramon, and I can't remember. I'm blanking on this psychologist's name.
Shiran or Shireen.
Shireen?
I pronounce it somewhat like that in my own head, at least. Go on.
So I will give it a 1. It's kind of a soft one,
Fair
as
enough.
you would say.
It's a legit
because-
term in the MOTS system.
Because characterization is also another thing that I think early Asimov is not
Wasn't on the top of
very
his game
well
yet.
suited.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, he wasn't.
All right.
So it's a 1, but with reservations.
Soft 1.
Yes.
I agree that Theramon is the protagonist of the story. And I would give him a 0 because he does have a character arc of sorts, but from his interactions with the psychiatrist, that elevates his character quite a bit and gives him someone to play off of. So he's not necessarily the strongest protagonist on his own, but in the context of the story, he is serviceable. He provides what is necessary to deliver the information to the audience. So I agree with you. I will give him a soft 1 as well.
I'm right with you. It's going to be, soft and shallow. But I was going to give it a 0, funny enough. And then, as you said, when I realized that he was the audience's POV and looking at the bigger picture, he does an effective job. I agree with Beth that early Asimov's characterization and another question will come to are his weak spots. But I thought he did his job enough. So he served his purpose and not really much beyond that.
Scott?
Fair enough. All right, so I'll blow your guys' minds again. Allow me, if you will. Yes, I agree that he's a protagonist. So he was perfectly fine. And as you said, he was sort of fleshed out by the side characters around him. He was allowed to be fleshed out by them. So I'll probably give him a soft 1. But again, if the flip side of the previous question I just answered, the protagonist would be humanity's scrappy search for truth. Like they're all trying to figure it out the best they can with what they have, and this again in situation and what they're stuck with. So if you take that to be, yes, it's more humorous, but nevertheless, it's almost a fight. The search for the unknown versus the walls you may run up against trying to find that truth, and filtered through his eyes. As you see the action unfold through him, I think it's a solid 1 for me.
Yeah, I may have to push that 1 a little harder because.
It's hard. His 1's getting bigger.
No, because seriously. But when you said scrappy, I thought, oh wait. When you said scrappy, I thought reality television. I'm like, wait a minute. The audience's POV is a reporter.
No, they're scrappy.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is even in this story, the media serves as it does. It's like kind of a meta thing because the media serves our eyes to the world. In this case, the protagonist is the media. So it's a strong. All right, I'm going to give it. He's a strong protagonist.
Totally, I'm blowing your minds. But let me just add one more thing. Like there's a line early on. He says like, "Well, I'm just here just in case you're wrong about the end of the world." Like that was a very nice setup. And then he realizes like, no, they're completely right. He was wrong, and everyone else is wrong too. So, anyways, that's all I want to say about that. Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to begin on the supporting cast. Again, I have a little tradition that if I find one memorable supporting character...
Your criteria for this question is
just one. And the psychiatrist Shireen, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I thought...
We'll get Asimov on the horn and see what he thinks about it.
Did a fantastic job of kind of playing... If Thurman was our POV, Shireen was our ambassador to this world.
I like that.
Where the astronomers really couldn't play that role because they were far too in their world.
They were just Michael Crichton exposition dumping you all the time. Go ahead.
Sure. So I really enjoyed his dialogue pieces when the fact that he's wanting to drink throughout this entire event.
Yeah, that was a good touch.
Finding hidden booze around the place. Overall, I really of all the characters, I connected to his the most throughout. So I have to give this just for that one character a strong 1. Chris?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a strong 1 too. I love the supporting characters. They all have because they're all so worried about going insane or expecting they're going to go insane. They're all insane while this is going on. They're all these different levels of eccentricities. I really enjoyed it, and I thought the supporting characters really gave the story boosts when it needed it. So yeah, it's a very strong 1 for me.
I mostly agree with what you guys both said. I'm not sure if I have much more to add. The psychiatrist Sheeran, whatever his name may be pronounced, was the perfect go-between between the two worlds that you're being presented with, and the conversation. I guess this applies to a question a little bit, but their dynamic is fleshed out excellently between the interactions of all three of them. That is to say, the reporter, the psychologist, and the astronomer, the head astronomer. And they get they're all sort of standoffish at first, kind of with each other, and then as the situation gets more dire, they become close. They're bonding with each other because they're about to go mad together, and the end of the world is coming. So yes, to that point, I even think Beaton or another middle
Bettany or
something like that, the middle not in charge guy, but the guy who's running the cameras. He sits down and also has a conversation, presents his theories about that end up being pretty much true anyways. So yeah, I agree with you. It's a very solid 1 for me for supporting cast.
I could have 1 also. The 2 astronomers who went and did their own experiment on darkness and tried to create stars. I loved that little side story because it's just so. They were we didn't want to tell you because we wanted to keep you all safe because we thought we might just go mad. So we did it on our own. We bought this whole building. We set it up. We got electricians in and carpenters, and we did it. And it just didn't work. Nothing happened. So we just kept trying to do it. I just love that story. So just on the strength of those 2 characters who did that sort of self-sacrificing attempt at solving the problem, I give it a 1.
All right. Now, Chris, dialogue. What's your thoughts?
This is really funny because this is something I thought I was going to give a 0 to, but I thought this was a pretty poignant story when I read it. And this discussion, as all MOTS discussions are supposed to do, is start making you think about things differently. And I'm thinking about this. The dialogue was extremely dry, but if you think about it in terms of, like I said, a Twilight Zone episode or science fiction at the time. I mean, if you've read Who Goes There by
Outer Limits as well,
Outer Limits. It's very, very dry, but the dialogue does what. Everything we're discussing comes out of dialogue. So yeah, I'm gonna have to give it a 1.
Okay, Scott.
Fair enough. So yeah, this was one I was debating with earlier as well. But based on everything we just said, I may have convinced myself of a score to give it, more readily. I'm going to give it a 1. Not even soft, a perfectly middle of the road 1. Yes, it was dry and that's sort of Asimov's style in a sense.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing wrong with it. It was just again maybe as we mentioned, artifact of the times. It's just sort of cut and dry, but it becomes interesting because the situation becomes more interesting, I think. And a couple of lines, actually, the ones I just mentioned, did kind of make me laugh. He's what happens if the world doesn't end? So that sort of convinced myself to give it a decent 1.
Yeah.
Good.
I thought about this quite a lot because I read the questions and then I reread the story, and I was leaning towards giving it a 0 because the dialogue.
It's serviceable, but it's not flowery,
right,
I guess.
and it explained the astronomy, I guess, the physics of that civilization, and the characters. There wasn't a huge amount of variability between the characters. Like, they all kind of sounded alike. But then I thought about, like, all but 2 of them are astronomers, and they're scientists
So
in
that's
their
how they would be,
civilization, so
like.
they would kind of talk in that dry way.
Stilted, yeah.
And the reporter is interviewing them and kind of trying to fit in and get them to talk to him, and the psychiatrist obviously has been working with them. So then I kind of decided that that's how they would talk. And so then I decided I would give it a 1. So I'm giving it a 1.
All right.
I'm not going to give it a 1 because of its wit or its fluidity. I'm going to give it a 1 because of the ideas behind it.
Fair
That
enough.
concept of, you get a long speech about how they ran just a 15-minute walk through a tunnel, and
People went
died.
fucking
Right.
yeah. True.
And there's so much creativity, maybe not in
In the prose, but in the ideas.
in the prose, but
yeah.
in the,
True,
the
I'll agree with that.
things that he had to say about whether it's detailing specifics about how the physics of this world existed, or dealing with what might exist, what kind of architectural style might exist in this world versus Earth. And I have to say, for the sheer amount of ideas he had, I have to give it a 1. Okay, and finally, not finally.
Not finally.
Not quite.
One last one. All right, Scott. Was the immersion broken during this?
So this one's a little bit difficult, but not quite. At the end of the day, I'll just tell you my score. It's a 1. It wasn't quite broken, and I think that goes to the nature of like how the setup is. It's almost hard to like sci-fi. When is your immersion going to be broken? Like, what will you accept and what won't you? Given that it's fantastical sort of anyways. Yes, it's based in facts, which this one definitely very much was, which I respect for. So, and that's probably goes into my reason of giving it a 1. You said, like, all right, if this were a movie or like a visual medium, when the cultists burst in, it would be like a laugh track, like would be played or something. Like it seemed like it's slapstick, but I don't think it wasn't quite, because everyone's going mad and they're already zealots anyways. So given all that, and I don't think it was ever broken. Nothing pulled me out of it because I accepted almost anything that was going to happen.
This one, when at the end he suddenly names Earth, and you hear like the storyteller.
I took that as a narrator. I thought it was a good effect, but I see what you're going to say. Go on.
I didn't like that. I thought he could have done it without using the word Earth. Just say like, oh, and not just this small amount of stars that they were predicting, but like a ridiculous amount of stars that you couldn't even imagine. So that kind of took me out of it, and I was like, what are you doing here? But I feel like because it was the end, and so I was like okay with the storyteller kind of making himself known a bit. So for me, that didn't make it unacceptable. So it's still an acceptable level of immersion, even though it was sort of slightly broken at the tail end. So I'm still going to give it a 1.
But not enough to give it a 0.
Right.
You're more forgiving than I am.
I'm not as strict as you.
There's one scene when the cultists broke in,
As I just said, yes.
Perhaps it was because of the heavy amount of dialogue and back and forth right before, and it just seemed strange to me, and it definitely snapped me out of the depth I was reading it in. Perhaps any scene following such a heavy conversation they had would have happened, but again, it happened, and
Therefore,
this is
0.
binary, 0 or 1, and it has to be given a 0.
Fair enough.
Chris?
This is yet another one I thought I was going to give a 0 to, but I'm going to give it a 1, and I'm going to say that my immersion was broken just by a physical thing because I was reading it on my iPad and it was kind of bothering my eyes. But
too many suns in your face.
There's too many. Exactly.
Go on.
But what kept me going from the story, what kept me from getting up or doing anything, was that I was so interested in what he was saying. It was a very dialogue-heavy story, but the ideas conveyed made up for the dryness of the dialogue. I found the little tangents to be what really kind of kept me in the moment, because I'd be reading, I'm like, oh my god, my eyes are tired. And then they would talk about the dark tunnel, which I immediately thought of the euthanasia coaster.
Yes.
If you want to look it up, look at the
They
death.
accidentally built a euthanasia coaster.
Yeah, they accidentally built a euthanasia coaster.
Unintentionally.
And ironically enough, every time the thing broke my immersion, it gained my interest. So those little things were kind of like little unexpected pops. So I'm definitely giving it a 1. To me, it kind of started reminding me like Dr. Strangelove in the War Room.
I was going to say that. God damn it. All right.
Sorry.
Go on. That's fine. It's,
I'll let you-
it's
you
a good
want-
connection.
I'll let you elaborate.
You already said it, so go on.
But
What else?
because things would just start off like mildly insane and just got more insane as they went along.
Sure.
Like just the way he was describing when they're trying to barricade the door, where he actually starts talking about the furniture itself.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting. I give it a 1.
Okay. And finally, Beth, did you enjoy this, and would you recommend it?
Yes, that I'm giving a strong 1.
In fact, she already recommended it. It
I
was
did.
her pick
I mean,
for this.
I was the one that recommended.
Quick
the story to
disclosure
begin
there,
with.
Beth. Go on.
That's all.
I will give this a 1, but I mean, if you're listening to a literature cast, you'll probably want to read this anyway. So, sci-fi. It's hard science fiction as well, in a sense, although it does have that level of absurdity to it. But, it's a quick read, it's fun, and it makes some very good points.
Raises
about,
some important
the
ideas.
bias we have in life, and whether we can handle the bigger truths. Lord knows I can't. So,
Before I move on, I feel like this story shows what science fiction is for. Like, it has
I can
these
agree with
big
that.
ideas that...
Presenting you questions that you have
Yeah, that
perhaps
you
did not
had...
consider
It's like
earlier.
the reverse of... Was it Plato's Cave?
Yes.
It's like the reverse of that. Like, suddenly you're...
I actually thought of that while I was reading
You
it.
don't know what's going on. It's just a way to introduce these ideas, like the what if of science fiction, which is why I just love the genre as a
And
whole.
subverting our views by proposing alternate versions.
Sure.
So that's great. Chris?
I'm giving this a very, very strong 1 with a caveat. Because to me, and I've said this before, it reminds me of Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, Star Trek. Kurt Vonnegut's Player Piano, which is
Yes.
where they have ideas and they get away with so much stuff by putting it in a science fiction context. In Player Piano, it was kind of more of an exaggerated, corporate-run world set in a 1950s setting. But it got to the absurdity of the original series of Star Trek. And it had certain elements of all these things that I love between the 50s and the 60s. And to what Beth said, it really showed you everything that science fiction was for, what it was, what it became, what it still is. It's a very strong 1. But if you're not into science fiction, you're not going to like the story.
Well, again, I'm not into science fiction. I mean, specifically, I'm not really into hard science fiction. But I enjoyed this one. I could appreciate the messages it said. So.
Yeah, but knowing your taste, that you have a variety of things. I mean, if you're not a science fiction fan, like you hate Star Trek, Star Wars, you're not going to like this. Otherwise, I'd recommend this to anybody.
That would just be sad.
It would be sad.
Possibly, but fair enough. You basically, that's what I was going to say. I'm giving it a 1. Yes, I'd recommend it. Perhaps you might get more out of it, or be more inclined to read it if you're already a fan of that genre and that kind of writing. And you may know what it sort of like entails anyways. But I would recommend it generally because of the fact that what you said, it presents to you, as Beth said, sci-fi, at least definitely back in that time and still is today, but it's a vehicle by which to present possibilities / ideas to you as a reader that you may not have considered earlier, or may consider them in a new light anyways. So in that regard, and just, as it was pulled off in the story, I'll give it a very solid recommendation and a 1.
Okay. Well, now that we're done here, we're going to give it the aggregate scores. Scott, Beth, and myself all gave it 9s, while nice guy Christopher Morgan gave it a 10. So overall, we give Nightfall by Isaac Asimov a 9.25.
I have to go mad seeing the stars now.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Music and editing by Chris Morgan.
Lots to do about nothing.
This has been a Lost Signals production. All rights reserved.